American Studies at Lehman College. She's in the 10th grade, and her question is, I want to know your opinion about whether the U.S. is lacking democracy nowadays or not.
Well, let me see. Angelica, did you say her name is pronounced Amcia?
Amcia.
Amcia. Thank you for your question. It's a really important one. So I think that we have a combination of things going on right now. There are some areas, depending on where you are, especially, where we have strong democratic institutions. But overall, federally, I think there's a case to be made that the United States not even the case to be made. I think it's something that we know. Democracy in the United States is eroding. And we are at a crossroads right now on whether we are going to check that erosion or allow that erosion to continue to happen. There are certain institutions since the founding of the United States that are fundamentally undemocratic. The United States Senate is one such example. Now, we elect our senators by popular vote. That is a democratic part. That is a democratic function. There are some states, like, for example, in Georgia and in Texas, where the right to vote is under attack. And that is fundamentally undemocratic. But what makes the Senate, but that affects everybody and all seats. But what makes the Senate fundamentally undemocratic is that it gives small groups of people the same amount of power as massive groups of people. And that is not democratic at all. So, for example, New York City alone, let alone New York State, but New York City alone has millions of people. And in fact, if New York State, the amount of people in New York State, we have 2 senators. When you take a state that has a fraction of the people in the United States, or a fraction of the people in that state, they also get 2 senators. So what does that mean? That means in the United States Senate, someone from New York has a fraction of the say and a fraction of the power as one person in a different state with a lower population. So that's not one person, one vote. And when we look back at the impact that this is happening, when we see why climate change is so difficult to solve, when we see why it's taking so long to protect the right to vote in the United States, it's because, you look at someone like, for example, in West Virginia has a similar population to the Bronx or like a couple of our boroughs put together, let alone all of New York State. And so the Senate is a fundamentally undemocratic institution. And I would argue that it is actually imperiling the rest of our democracy because it is blocking action to protect our democracy in a lot of other ways. And so, there are a lot of very key and important ways in the U.S. is lacking democracy. Another way is in presidential elections, where our president is actually not elected by majority vote, but elected by the Electoral College, yes. Which means that if you notice during campaign season, presidents don't really come to New York as often. They will every once in a while. But during a presidential campaign, especially after the primary, presidents don't really spend time in New York. They spend a lot more time in states with much fewer people because of the Electoral College, because they don't need to win all these people they're not competing for votes in New York, they're competing for a much smaller group of people by state. And what that means is that it has really huge implications for policymaking, which is why I would argue a lot of key civil rights issues facing people in the United States are not addressed because they aren't in, quote unquote, these swing states of small populations. And so a lot of our public policy gets designed around Iowa instead of designed around the entire country.
Thank you a lot, your Congresswoman.
Thank you,